We all know the huge role that water plays in watercolor. What about water and your brush and water and your paper? Getting that right balance is crucial. We'll look at a few different examples to find the perfect match. Let's go. For today's exercise, I'd like to compare 3 very different brushes, but all approximately the same size. So the first one is a very cheap size 12 synthetic brush. And the next one is a brush I got from Temu. It's a synthetic mop with a nice point. And I'm just really curious to see how much water it's going to hold. And my third one is a similar sized sable brush that I actually bought several years ago from Slovenia. So let's see what happens. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is what happens when I wet my brush. I'm wetting it, coming here, and you can see that there's a water droplet at the end of my brush and on the ferrule. Now for the Temu brush, again I have to wet it really, really well, and you can see the water droplet on the very tip of the brush and on the end of the ferrule. And now wait and see what happens when you completely wet a sable brush. And look, the brush is full of water, but there's no drips or drops, neither on the brush itself or the ferrule. So this is really important because when you do have droplets on the outside, visible, they're very easy to drop everywhere. And with a sable brush, you can drop them when you want to drop them. There's a difference. Now, the next thing to do is to fill our brushes with paint. That means watercolor, and squeeze it all out and see how much we end up with. So firstly, I'm going to my cheap size 12 brush and over to a dry well and squeeze it all out. So there's our paint. Now it's Temu brush's turn, and I'm saturating my brush with the watercolor and squeezing it out. And finally, it's our sable brush, and I'll load it up completely and squeeze it out. As you can see, different brushes hold different amounts of water, and this is crucial and really important in our painting process. When you experience the difference, you'll never look back. When we know that a brush only gives us that much paint, we can still paint like we do with this one, but we have to dip it into the paint more. So we'll do an example. For our third example, it's the next day, and I have to slip in a few more tips about the paint this time. As you can see, my paint has dried up, and now I need to reactivate it. This is very important, and I actually spend more time preparing my paint than I do painting. And look, what have we learnt? We haven't actually wasted any pigment because it's all reactivating. That's why it's always super important to mix more paint than you think you'll use. Because if you're doing something and you run out of paint and you start to mix another batch of paint, it's really, really hard to come up with the exact same consistency, which may ruin your wash. So always mix more than you need. If we don't, that's a sure reason not to get a smooth wash, because you just can't mix the paint fast enough and to the same consistency whilst the paint that's already on the paper is already drying. So that's a key, crucial thing to take into account. And another tip is, whilst you're reactivating your paints and massaging your brush, Use an old brush, a kiddie brush that you can buy in the discount store, because it's just all that work that the brush has to go through may wreck a good brush. So now I have 3 decent puddles here, and I'm just going to test the consistency of my paints. I have washed my brush between the colors and dried it out so that I don't add any more water to the paint. But it's all looking good. So now for today's ultimate exercise, where we compare 3 papers, 3 brushes with paint of equal consistency, and you will see differences. So the first paper I'm using is a paper called watercolor paper, but it's non-cotton. It's 180 GSM, and it is acid-free, but that's it. The next paper is a Baohong hot-pressed watercolor paper, so it's smooth, 300 GSM. And my third one is Arches cold-pressed watercolor paper, which is often considered one of the best. To maximize my chances of a smooth wash, I'm tilting my paper on a little prop. If you'd like to know more about that, I have a special video which talks about the differences in tilted and non-tilted paper. And you can do it, but you have to paint differently. So today, all tilted. Start first with our cheapest brush, this one, and we'll go on to the cheaper paper. Dipping my brush into the pink and going for it. Now, as you may recall, this brush doesn't hold much water. So it's already drying as it comes to the end of the line. This is where you then step up and say, right, I need more paint. See there? Now, this can turn out okay if you just dip your brush in every time. And I'm working on a slope, which means that I'm creating a bead, which means that this bead is kept alive because every single stroke I'm adding more color. The bead is the long droplet that forms at the bottom of the paint. It happens because paint is running down the page due to gravity. I'm going to purposely interrupt the process and just paint on the left-hand side of this, purposely taking my time and messing about a bit. Because I have the bead on the right-hand side, I can go there now and continue as if I had never stopped. That's the beauty of it. And although I'm not showing you in this example here, if I had stopped without a bead, there would have been a sure telltale sign. This was on cheaper paper. If we evaluate what's happened here, the thing is, this was done without stopping, but I re-dipped my brush every single time I did a line. That meant that the bead, which you saw, was alive the whole time, and therefore the transition was super smooth. That's pretty good for non-cotton paper. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to go back into this to try to fix something because it'll become uneven. And now I'm going to use the Timu brush and I'll dip it into the green. Now, this one also started to dry up at the end of the wash. Here there's plenty, there's little. So I'm quickly going to go over that with more paint and make sure that we have this running amount of water here, the bead. And now I've dipped into the paint again and it's going down, traveling down the page, dip again, traveling down, dip again, and it actually can be smooth. I'm going to wash my brush and wipe off the excess paint. But these brushes don't suck up paint very well because they're not very absorbent. So I'm going to wipe it. So when the brush doesn't want to pick up paint, then you have to pick it up with a tissue or a paper towel. Now let's go to the sable brush, and I will go for the blue. What's happened in this first line is that the paint has gone to the end. I'm going to dip again. You can go backwards and forwards. Let's say forwards and backwards. This has so much paint on it in the brush, and you can really feel it. See how this one easily picks up the paint? I've washed my brush, I've dried it, and now I can mop this up. This is the cheap watercolor paper. Now let's move on to the Baohong one. And again, we're going to use our cheapest brush. I might start with blue this time. I am loading it as much as I possibly can. And now, because the paper is smoother, the water is going further. And on smooth paper, water tends to sit on the paper a little bit longer as well. But it's worthwhile mentioning that it's very hard to achieve a very smooth wash on a hot press paper, especially with plenty of strokes. When people do washes on smooth paper, generally larger brushes with a lot of water and the least amount of strokes works best. Now going over to the Timu brush, washing it and wiping it dry and going for the pink. It always ends up running out on that side. But you see, I'm not rushing, because when you paint on a tilted surface like this and you create the bead, it does give you time. It's relaxing. It's not stressful. Again, this is a hot pressed paper, and I do not recommend this if you're a beginner. But now, if we were to do this with my sable brush, there's something really soft and smooth about a sable brush, and it also creates a smoother wash. Okay, now we're going to move on with the cheap brush over to the arches paper. As you can see, even with a fully loaded brush, I just barely got over halfway with the cheap brush. The cold press paper absorbs more paint, so I quickly have to reload. But in saying this, as long as I have a lot of paint mixed and I maintain the bead on the paper, you can see that even a cheaper brush can create a beautiful wash on a good paper. The Timu brush is also quickly running out of paint, but just by maintaining the bead, I can create a beautiful smooth wash. And finally, our sable brush, a fantastic brush holding heaps of pigment and water as it glides down Arches watercolor paper. It's a match made in heaven. And I've only re-dipped on the very last stroke. So let's have a look at our final results. This is watercolor paper, non-cotton, 180 GSM. It can work to some degree, but it's hard work. And I did do all this on a tilted surface, so it had time to run down the paper somewhat. If you were to do this on a flat surface, it could easily pull a lot. So there's the cheapest brush, the Temu brush, and the sable brush. With hot press paper, if you're a beginner and if you want to do washes, I don't recommend it. But, if you like to do detail little things where you don't use much water, that's much better. But look, this is Arches cold press watercolor paper, and it doesn't matter what kind of brush you have, you can achieve amazing results because of the paper. So what's the takeaway today? Well, it's that all materials behave differently. Brushes hold different amounts of water. Different papers accept water and paint differently. You just have to paint accordingly. You need to mix enough paint when you're painting so that you can get through a certain wash. And if your paper is tilted, your wash will run smoothly down the paper without creating puddles and marks. You don't need a large tilt either. Even resting your board on a book, a slight 10 to 15 degree slope will be enough. So invest in some good paper. It's your number one asset. And I'm sure you can see the merit in getting used to a certain type of paper with your brushes. It doesn't really matter what brand, but practicing on the same brand will give you better and better results each and every time.